China, 850 AD. An alchemist looking for the elixir of life mixed saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. The mixture exploded with a flash when exposed to an open flame. He had created gunpowder. It was no elixir of life, but it was a turning point for mankind. Since that day, guns and gunpowder have been at the heart of the human experience. They have changed the way battles were fought and borders were drawn. The development of modern weaponry has seen the rise and fall of vast industrial empires in the quest to create some of the world's most innovative, powerful, and lethal machines known to mankind. These are the guns that changed the game. Production of pistols and rifles boomed during the Industrial Revolution, when manufacture of these weapons moved from the gunsmiths into the factories. The age of the entrepreneurs and innovators had begun. Global and local conflicts in the late 19th and 20th centuries enabled manufacturers like Colt, Winchester, and Smith & Wesson to build huge industrial empires based on the production of personal weapons. Samuel Colt was a knockabout guy. He had been a cabin boy on a square rigger and snake oil salesman before moving into gun production with the backing of his wealthy parents. A brilliant innovator, Colt established the Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company. Although he died in 1862, he had set in train a company that had, by the end of the 19th century, created three iconic revolvers: the Colt Navy, the Colt Peacemaker, and the Colt 38. Indeed, the Peacemaker had been credited by many eminent historians as the gun that won the American West. It was the weapon of choice for the lawman, Wyatt Earp, and other combatants at the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. In 1898, the U.S. War Department wanted to replace the Colt 38 revolver with the semi-automatic Colt Browning 1900, an extremely reliable and robust weapon. There were doubts about its stopping power when confronting a tenacious and highly motivated enemy. After conducting experiments, test firing on human cadavers, cattle, and horses, it was decided that the .45 would be the caliber of the new weapon. The Colt Company developed the 1911 semi-automatic pistol around this ammunition. The gun was a testament to the skills of its designer, the legendary John Moses Browning, a Mormon from the town of Ogden in Utah. He adopted the concept Hiram Maxim used in his self-loading rifle, using the energy of a fired cartridge to load the gun. Browning is still regarded as a giant amongst firearms designers. He invented or improved single-shot, lever-action and pump-action rifles and shotguns. He also invented a machine gun, But his most significant contributions were in the area of auto-loading firearms. He developed the first reliable and compact auto-loading pistols by inventing the telescoping bolt. This innovation is now found on nearly every modern semi-automatic pistol. The Colt 1911 was the first weapon to use it and features a slide which acts as both the barrel shroud and the bolt. After extensive testing, the U.S. War Department chose the 1911 as the standard issue service weapon for U.S. soldiers. Even in his wildest dreams, Browning would not have thought that this gun would still be in wide use after more than 100 years. It has been used by U.S. servicemen and women in every theater of war since World War I. The American military alone has purchased 2.7 million of these guns. It's a testament to Browning's design that the gun has required negligible improvement since its introduction. John Browning died of a heart attack in a workshop in Belgium in 1926. He was working on a 9mm semi-automatic pistol for the French military. It was eventually completed by 1935 by Belgian designer Dudon Sive, and it became popularly known as the Browning High Power. It quickly became a favorite of sportsmen and gun collectors, as well as military and law enforcement agencies around the world. It is still widely used today. We are told history is written by the victor, and the counterpart of America's Colt 1911 has repeatedly been cast as the villain's pistol. But make no mistake about it, the Pistool Parabellum, or Luger as it became known, was a real game changer. The Pistool Parabellum was designed by George Luger. It was first manufactured in 1898 and was initially used by the Swiss Army in 1900 and then by the German Army in World Wars I and II. Luger also designed the 9x19mm Parabellum round, the most widely used handgun round in history. Ominously, the word Parabellum loosely translates to prepare for war. This was derived from the motto of the company that manufactured the Luger, DWM, German Weapons and Munitions. If you seek peace, prepare for war. The Luger, as it would come to be known, was a precisely engineered instrument, making it an exceptionally reliable weapon. But because they were engineered to low tolerances, a small amount of dust and dirt can jam the action. It requires constant cleaning and oiling. It also developed a reputation as being unreliable, most likely from its tendency to jam when not loaded with the specific ammunition designed for the gun by George Luger himself. Ergonomically, the gun was head and shoulders above any of its competitors. It conformed beautifully to the human hand with its center of gravity to the rear of the weapon, and it was also one of the most accurate handguns ever manufactured. But as a combat weapon, the Luger had its shortcomings. Nonetheless, the Luger could well have become a standard issue firearm for the U.S. Army. It was shortlisted in the 1907 U.S. pistol trials. The Colt 1911 eventually won on the day, but the Luger went on to be used by many military and police forces right around the world. But it's not only the gun's association with the Nazis that gives the pistol its reputation as the pistol of villains. Lugers were also the pistol of choice for many shady groups and insurrectionists. As Nazi Germany was rearming in the mid-1930s, they began looking for a handgun to complement and then replace the Lugers already in service. They were after a simpler, cheaper weapon that could be mass-produced quickly. The Walther P-38 proved to be a game changer. Karl Walther was a third-generation rifle maker with a small factory manufacturing hunting and target rifles in Thuringia, Germany. Walther's son Fritz convinced him that pistols were the future, and in 1908, they began manufacturing pistols with limited success. Their first 9 models were unremarkable, although number 6, a copy of a 9mm Luger pistol, sold 1,000 units and has now become a favorite collector's item. Around this time, Walther also diversified into calculators, which successfully sold around the world. The size of a typewriter, they were a mechanical forerunner to the modern electric calculator using a pinwheel mechanism. Electronic versions of this machine were still on sale in the 1970s. In 1929, they began to make the PP Police Pistols series, and suddenly, they were on a winner. This was followed in 1931 by the first of the PPKs, Police Pistol Detective Model. The PP models were the first mass-produced pistols with stamped parts, but they were dependable and consistently high quality with lower production costs. In 1938, the Nazis were awarded the contract for the Luger replacement to the Walther P-38s. Both PPKs and the P-38s feature an exposed hammer and a double-action trigger, which meant they could be fired manually, cocking the hammer or by pressing the trigger twice. The P-38, however, uses the same 9x19mm parabellum round as the Luger. The Walther P-38 was in production right through World War II. From 1942 until the end of the war, Walther pistols were made in a factory established inside the Neuengamme concentration camp under directions of the Nazi regime. While conditions for prisoners working in the factory were better, they lived under the constant threat of being transferred to the death camps. By the end of the war, more than 1.2 million P-38s and PPKs had been produced for the Nazi armed forces in comparison to 900,000 Lugers. But the Walther's factories were destroyed by incoming troops from the USSR and the US. The Americans were reluctant to allow small arms designers and technologists from the Nazi regime to fall into Russian hands. So on the 28th of July in 1945, 2 GIs arrived at the Walther home. They gave the family 1 hour to pack their belongings and then set out for an unknown destination. The Walthers escaped to the American zone, and within a few years, Fritz had established a new factory in Ulm, West Germany. In 1950, he began a collaboration to produce PP and PPK pistols at Alsace in France. The PPK is an iconic gun. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Germany, was cowering in an underground bunker, with Russian forces only 500 meters away. He took a cyanide tablet, then shot himself with his service pistol, a Walther PPK. On October 26, 1979, South Korean dictator Park Chung-lee was assassinated by the director of the Korean CIA using a PPK. The gun has also found its way into popular culture. Elvis Presley had a gold-plated PPK engraved with his name and kept it in a fur-lined leather satchel. The PPK was the pistol of choice for James Bond 007 and featured prominently in promotional imagery around the world. In 1980, the Austrian military announced that they would be running trials for a new handgun to replace their aging Walther P-38s. They set up a rigorous process, but that didn't deter big-name manufacturers like Heckler & Koch, Sig Sauer, and Browning. The final decision sent a shockwave through the pistol-making industry. It was a true game-changer. Gaston Glock was a curtain rod manufacturer, and his only experience with arms manufacturing had been the making of handles and sheaths for field knives used by the Swiss Army and fabricating dummy hand grenades. What Glock did know about was combining plastics and steel, and he had just purchased an injection molding machine. In 1980, when he overheard two Austrian military officers discussing the replacement of the P-38, he decided to throw his hat into the ring. Glock assembled a team of handgun experts and former camera technicians to develop a pistol that would not only fulfill the Austrian military's extremely tough criteria, but would overcome other problems with pistols currently on the market. It took less than 12 months from concept and design to the production of the first Glock 17. Extremely lightweight due to its mainly polymer makeup. Dependable. There had never been a full-sized pistol with so few parts. And protected against accidental discharge by its SAS system, which counterintuitively features no safety catch.
It basically works as a safety mechanism. It does not come with an external safety mechanism.
Initially, the pistol was regarded with skepticism because it was thought that polymers could not take the punishment of metal, a completely unfounded assumption. The Glock's durability during the trialing had been outstanding. In 1983 and 1985, the Glock underwent extensive evaluation by the Norwegian and Swedish armed forces. This testing resulted in the Glock's classification as a NATO firearm. It's now in use in 45 countries. In 1988, the first Glocks found their way into the United States. Driven by the emboldened cartels, it was also a year of unprecedented escalation of illegal drug activity. Police were beginning to feel outmanned by the street gangs and were looking for new ways to get ahead of the problem. The FBI and DEA adopted the Glock as their weapon of choice, as did numerous U.S. state police departments. Over 5 million Glocks have been sold worldwide, and it was inevitable that some would find their way into the wrong hands. Popular culture embraced the Glock, with it being featured as the gangster's gun of choice. Gaston Glock even threatened to sue record companies that published songs with lyrics that associated the Glock pistol with gangster culture. As a final footnote to this story, Gaston Glock became a billionaire on the back of his success. But his tax advisor, Charles Hewitt, embezzled millions from him. In July 1999, in an attempt to cover up the crime, Ewart hired a French hitman to kill Glock with a hammer. Glock was able to fight him off, but received serious injuries. The hitman was sentenced to 17 years prison, and Ewart to 20. Sometimes a gun can be a game changer, not because of what it is, but because of what it did. The Charter Arms Undercover is a wholly unremarkable handgun. But on the 8th of December 1980, it broke the world's heart. The Undercover Action Revolver is constructed from aircraft-grade aluminum. It's small and lightweight, yet its one-piece frame gives it the strength to shoot high loads. It was this gun that Mark David Chapman paid $169 for at a gun shop in Honolulu, Hawaii. Chapman had a permit and no police record, so the dealer would have no reason to block the sale.
This is a .38 caliber revolver of the same sort that killed John Lennon. The cost about £65. You can buy it over the counter here just by producing a driver's license.
In October that year, Chapman told his wife that it was his intention to kill ex-Beatle John Lennon. His wife chose not to tell the police or mental health services. Chapman, a devout Christian, was angry with comments Lennon had made 14 years ago when he said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. Chapman was also obsessed with the book, Catcher in the Rye. He wanted to model his life on the book's anti-hero, Holden Caulfield. Chapman traveled to New York, and on the morning of the 8th of December, he bought a copy of Catcher in the Rye, in which he wrote, "This is my statement," signing it, Holden Caulfield. He left the book behind in his hotel for police to find. At 5 p.m., Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono left their apartment building to visit a recording studio. Chapman was waiting outside with a group of fans. Lennon autographed a copy of his album Double Fantasy for Chapman, and then left in a cab. 4 hours later, when Lennon and his wife returned and walked towards the front door of the apartment, Chapman fired 5 hollow-point bullets at Lennon from close range. 4 hit him in the back and shoulder. He was pronounced dead on arrival at hospital. The outpouring of sorrow triggered by Lennon's death was unprecedented. Millions of people around the world responded to Yoko Ono's request for 10 minutes of silence. Almost 250,000 people converged on Central Park, near the scene of the murder, and every New York City radio station went off the air for that 10 minutes. Pistol is a gun that can be deployed quickly, particularly at close range. But the rifle is a long-range weapon, the natural choice of hunters and soldiers.
And today, we still depend on the man with a rifle. For despite artillery, rockets, and even more sophisticated weapons, the rifleman is still king on the battlefield.
The forerunner of the rifle is the flintlock musket, a weapon first introduced in the 1600s. Up until the Crimean War in the 1850s, these muskets were the staple choice for the military around the world. They were smooth-bore guns, which meant they had no rifling around the inside of their barrels to spin their projectile, giving it more power and accuracy. In the second half of the 1800s, breech loading rifles were introduced, using brass-encased ammunition of various calibers. The Henry and Spencer lever-action repeating rifles, introduced in the 1860s, were a major step forward, but they had their limitations. It took John Moses Browning to take the rifle to a whole new level. The story begins almost 40 years earlier, when Horace Smith and Daniel Wesson set up the Volcanic Arms Company in 1855 to develop a repeating rifle that had been designed by Walter Hunt, a prolific innovator who also invented the safety pin, the fountain pen, and the lock-stitch sewing machine. Smith and Wesson were unable to successfully commercialize Hunt's rifle, and the company went broke. It was revived by Oliver Winchester as the New Haven Arms Company, and he hired a rising star, Benjamin Henry, to improve the company's fortunes. Henry developed the Henry lever-action repeating rifle, which, along with the Spencer, had such an impact in the American Civil War. But he felt underappreciated and underpaid, and in 1865 he attempted to take over the company. Winchester prevailed and had success with the Winchester 1866 and 1873 repeating rifles. The Winchester 1873 has been called the rifle that won the West. But in truth, it was the 1894 that won America's hearts. It was the first repeating rifle to use smokeless powder ammunition. While the formulation and manufacture of gunpowder had gone through a number of improvements since its development, it still left behind a thick residue that would foul the barrels of guns and require that weapons were regularly cleaned to avoid malfunction. This reduced the rate of fire and inhibited the development of reliable repeating rifles. The first practical smokeless powder was developed in Paris in 1884 by a chemist named Paul-Marie Vieille. It was named Poudre B to mean poudre blanc, or white powder, to distinguish it from black powder, or gunpowder. Vieille's white powder had none of the disadvantages of black powder. It was safe and less compressed, very moisture resistant, and produced almost no smoke on discharge. It also generated far higher breech pressure, drastically increasing the muzzle velocity of the weapon. This posed a problem for the older model Winchesters because the new high-velocity ammunition could and did break the mechanisms, occasionally with tragic results. Winchester turned to the quiet genius, John Browning, to save the day. Possibly the most influential firearms designer in history. Browning was a man of great simplicity. His design tools were basic: rulers, calipers, spirit levels, and a set square. Designs were done on pieces of scrap paper. There was not a single drawing board in their workshop. Browning had the gift of being able to visualize in 3 dimensions. The partnership between the Winchester Company and Browning lasted for 20 years. In 1896, Winchester released their Model 1894 repeating rifle with a new mechanism designed by Browning. It was chambered for a new .30-30 cartridge, and it quickly became the world's most popular hunting rifle.
These were designed to last from generation to generation. The firearm I have, my 1894, was handed down from grandfather to grandson, grandfather to grandson, for several generations.
Over 7 million Winchester 1894s were sold over 110 years.
Every early hunter, every child, his dad taught him to shoot with a Winchester 94.
The next gun we look at was also designed by Browning. It's not a rifle, but it's an important gun and another example of Browning's genius. The Browning Auto 5 shotgun was designed by John Moses Browning in 1898 and patented in 1900. He called this gun his finest achievement. Production of the gun continued unbroken for almost 100 years, but getting things started was not easy. He first presented this gun to Winchester, where he had sold many of his previous inventions. He was convinced that the Auto 5 would be a winner and asked the head of Winchester, Thomas Bennett, for a royalty on each gun sold. Bennett was unwilling to do this, partly because he was afraid the Auto 5 might cannibalize the Winchester's lucrative line of shotguns. So Browning ended his relationship with Winchester and took the gun to Remington. But the president of the company died of a heart attack while Browning waited for a decision. He was forced to take the design overseas, and finally he did a deal with Fabrique Nationale in Belgium. A few years later, he licensed the gun to Remington. They called it the Model 11. The gun is a long recoil-operated semi-automatic shotgun. 5 shells are stored in a tube beneath the barrel. When a shell is fired, the barrel and bolt recoil together and recock the hammer. When the barrel returns to its original position, the bolt ejects the spent shell. And as the bolt travels forward, it feeds another shell into the action. Like all works of genius, it's deceptively simple. In the years before Browning split with Winchester, he also designed a pump-action shotgun, which won favor with law enforcement organizations as a riot gun. It was issued for military use during the Philippine-American War and later in World War I, where it was used as a trench gun because its barrel could be shortened significantly. At the opening of hostilities in World War I, the Germans felt they had a real edge with the Gewehr 98, or Mauser 98, designed by the legendary Austrian gunmaker Paul Mauser. Mauser was the son of a gunsmith from Oberndorf, and by the time he was in his 20s, he had been conscripted to the Ludwigsburg arsenal to work as a gunsmith. His first invention was a cannon and its ammunition. Right through his career, he seemed to have a unique capacity to design both the gun and the ammunition for it. Following the success at the arsenal, he went into business with his brother Wilhelm and developed a new turning bolt system that would become the foundation of the Mauser 98. Over the next 2 decades, Mauser produced a number of iconic guns. In many ways, he was the German John Browning. But by the turn of the century, he had developed a world-beating weapon. Many experts argue that the Mauser 98 is the best bolt-action rifle ever made. One thing is for certain, with all its variants and clones, it is certainly the most popular rifle ever created. But in every arms race, victory is transitory. Although an elegantly engineered rifle, the Mauser was expensive to produce. And while you could never call the Lee Enfield elegant, it was certainly cheap. The Lee Enfield rifle was the chosen weapon of the British Empire from the turn of the 20th century, and is still in action in some theaters of war. Rifle length has always been much debated. While full-length rifles have the advantage of being able to shoot further with more accuracy, most average soldiers can only shoot accurately to a distance of a few hundred meters at most. This problem is perfectly exemplified when we look at the Mauser 98. Its main practical drawback in the First World War was its long barrel with a minimum sight setting of 400 meters. This made it impractical in the close combat of trench warfare. This problem wouldn't be addressed until its World War II incarnation, the shortened Carabina 98K. For the Lee Enfield, this issue would never come into play, because by 1907, its barrel was shortened. The Lee Enfield was known by the troops that carried it as the smelly, short magazine Lee Enfield. The Smelly was also a versatile weapon when it came to loading. It could either accommodate one cartridge at a time or be fed by its detachable magazine. This allowed the soldier to use the single loading technique for firing as required, but also saved the 10-cartridge magazine for when heavy fighting ensued. This was once again different to the Mauser with its 5-round internal clip-loaded magazine. But the Enfield's main point of difference is that it has a cock-on close rather than cock-on opening action. Considered by many as a smoother, more intuitive action, it increases wear on the gun, but enables a greater rate of fire. A skilled Lee Enfield shooter could unleash 20 to 30 rounds in 60 seconds. It has been claimed that German infantry often thought they were under attack from machine gun fire when it was simply well-trained British soldiers with Lee Enfields. The other advantage of cock-on close is that the bolt does not obscure the line of sight when taking aim, thereby allowing for greater accuracy. One British field instructor held a record for planting 38 rounds in a 12-inch target in 60 seconds. World War II radically changed the landscape of war. Trench warfare was not nearly as common. It was fought in the tropics, the desert, and the cities.
The German war machine strikes again. Without warning, by air, by land, and water, the most terrible of all blitzkriegs so far, Nazi forces overrun neutral Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. A wanton act of aggression that has shocked the entire civilized world, and a new war terror for the Western Front.
A dazzling array of new or vastly improved weapons came into use. Bolt-action rifles became semi-automatics, assault rifles, and machine guns. New arms manufacturers and new ideas found outlets for their ingenuity. And the United States Armed Forces adopted a new infantry rifle to take over from the bolt-action Springfield. In January, just months before Germany's unconditional surrender in World War II, General George S. Patton declared the M1 Garand to be the greatest battle implement ever devised. American soldiers carried it at Normandy, Okinawa, and Incheon. From Europe to the Pacific, to Africa, and from World War II to the Korean War. For over 20 years, this semi-automatic rifle was the mainstay for millions of United States soldiers, Marines, and sailors. John Garand was a French-Canadian from Montreal. In 1916, he took a job as an engineer at the U.S. government's Springfield Armory in Illinois. It wasn't until 1926 that Garand began experimenting with a long-stroke gas piston system that trapped propellant gases in order to rotate the M1's bolt to unlock it and open the action. This allowed spent cases to be ejected and a fresh cartridge loaded. Testing in 1931 found that the Garand was simple, accurate, and reliable. In other words, a perfect military weapon. In 1932, he patented the rifle that would become the legendary M1 semi-automatic. Weighing only 9.5 pounds, it had a rigidly supported barrel and fired semi-automatically from an 8-shot magazine. The Army officially adopted the M1 in 1936, with the Marine Corps and Navy following by 1940. With an M-block magazine, the M1 allowed an infantryman to fire 8 shots as fast as he was capable of pulling the trigger. And in the hands of a skilled marksman, it could fire 40 to 50 rounds per minute. It had an effective range of 500 meters. This was a truly battle-hardy rifle. And for a semi-automatic weapon, it was uncomplicated, capable of being field-stripped in seconds without the aid of any tool. It could be used in all climates and terrain. When other weapons would stop working due to the cold in the dead of winter in Korea, the Garand kept on firing. A true patriot, John Garand, gave this amazing gun to the government royalty-free. He never profited from the more than 6 million M1 Garand rifles eventually produced, although there was a failed movement in Congress to give him a $100,000 grant. The inventor did receive many honors and awards, such as the Gold Medal for Meritorious Service in 1941. The M1 Garand was eventually replaced by the M14, to which it passed most of its significant design elements. Game-changing military rifles all had their sniper variants, but it was not until after the Second World War that they really came into their own. In 1982, Ronnie Barrett was a professional photographer taking photos of a military patrol boat. The boat was armed with 2 .50 caliber heavy machine guns, and Barrett was intrigued. He wondered if a rifle could be designed to fire the .50 BMG bullet. With no firearms design experience, Barrett drew the rifle in 3 dimensions and then took his design to a local machinist. 4 months later, they had a prototype semi-automatic rifle that used the .50 BMG cartridge. The rifle's barrel recoiled after firing, and the gun used part of the recoil energy to push back the block. This cycled the action, cocking the firing pin, and loaded a new round from a 10-round steel magazine. The CIA saw it as the perfect weapon for the Mujahideen guerrillas that were fighting the Soviet army in the mountains of Afghanistan. They immediately placed an order. The Barrett M82 is a revolutionary weapon. Its effective firing range is 1,800 meters. That's more than a mile. And it's a semi-automatic.
These weapons were all seized from Mexican drug cartels who bought them in America and were trying to transport them across the border. Because it is perfectly legal here to buy heavy weapons like this Barrett sniper rifle.
This is the caliber that's fired from this gun. It's a 50 caliber bullet. They need this type of firepower to assassinate VIPs that are in armored vehicles that has an effective kill range of over a mile.
The rifle began its service in 1989, and to this day is regarded as one of the world's state-of-the-art rifles. Its ability to destroy enemy war material such as communications equipment, vehicles, weapons, and other items created a new category of weapon, the anti-material rifle. But for all its sophistication and power, it does not hold a candle to the game-changing ability of this cheap, unremarkable infantry rifle. This particular Italian Army surplus bolt-action Carcano 91 with the serial number of C2766, equipped with a 4-power telescope, killed the leader of the Western world. Taking aim from the 6'4" window of a book depository as a motorcade passed by, Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 shots, fatally wounding the 35th President of the United States of America, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, in Dallas, Texas, on November 22, 1963.
It began on that bright November day in Dallas. There's the building from which the fatal shots were fired, shots which have echoed round the world, murdering a man in the full flower of his achievement, bringing sorrow and shame on the millions he sought to serve.
While we will never know what would have happened if Kennedy had lived, some say the shots from the Carcano 91 prolonged the Cold War. While Kennedy had used the threat of nuclear war in his election campaign, it has been argued that with his push for a limited ban on nuclear weapons near the time of his death, and a closer relationship with Nikita Khrushchev since the Bay of Pigs crisis, the Cold War may have thawed. Or at least, the nuclear arms race would have slowed. Next episode, we will explore the guns that influenced the Cold War. The machine guns and assault rifles that, through their automation, would change the field of battle forever.